Um, our final guest is Therese Taylor-Stinson, and she has written a book about Harriet Tubman, and her book takes a different perspective than the ones we've heard before, because we've had a couple of other people have books about Harriet Tubman. And Therese takes a spiritual perspective about Harriet Tubman. And Therese, she writes a lot about religion and faith. So she's going to tell us about Harriet, and she calls her the public mystic and freedom fighter. So Therese, welcome to Black Authors Matter TV. I'm glad you worked everything out to get on.
Yes, thank you, Gwen. That was a challenge, but here I am.
Okay. All right. So you, one, why did you decide to select Harriet Tubman as your subject on, and then why did you decide to take the angle or the perspective of her spiritual side?
So I don't think Harriet Tubman is a big surprise to anybody. I think at least Black people, we all know about Harriet and her story. And the problem for me was someone from Broadleaf Books, which was a new imprint at the time. This book published in on Valentine's Day last year, 2023. And so, and actually, I'd been working on it for maybe 2 years. And part of the thing was they told me write a book, any book about anything. And so, having taken a group from the place where I got my certificate in spiritual as a spiritual director, I was thinking about taking them at the Shalem Institute on over to the Eastern Shore where they could learn about Harriet. And so we went over there and saw all about her history and the places she was and everything, and that caused me to want to write about her, but not historically necessarily, because before I wrote, I looked up Harriet Tubman on Amazon, and there were about 37 history books on Harriet, and only one very small children's book, like maybe it wasn't written just for children, but it was, thin and small, and it was Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman as spiritual people. But it was so small and so little in there. So what I wanted to do was to write a book. First of all, someone who is dear to me, Barbara Holmes. I don't know if you know her name or not, but she is also an author, and she was president at one of the seminary that's in Minnesota. I can't remember the name of the seminary at the moment, but anyway, she talked about public mystics, and public mystics being people who are not just spiritual and sitting in a corner and the spirit is coming upon them or anything like that, but they are people who are inspired through the spirit to do things to help other people, give to other people, which in African tradition was always the way it was supposed to be, that which you were given was meant for your community and not just for you to be a public figure or someone that somebody lifted up because you were special or something like that. So Harriet Tubman definitely was a public mystic. She definitely cared about more than just herself and even just her family, but she did a lot for a lot of different people. And all of this came from her sense of faith, and that was deeply embedded in her. She was only about 2 generations removed from those who went through the Middle Passage. And so she probably got a lot of teaching, something that we in this age probably haven't had a lot of, a teaching from the African experience about being, true to your community and how the spirit can develop you and move you. She also suffered, she was in a store one day, an overseer had a young man with him who was trying to run away from him. And as he was trying to run away from him, the man picked up a 2-pound weight. And as he picked it up, Harriet stepped in front of the boy. Nobody knows for sure if she did that deliberately or not, but she stepped in front of him and he had thrown the weight and it hit her in the head. And it caused her to have a kind of narcolepsy where, you know, she could just go to sleep at any time. But her condition was a little different because in her slumber, or whatever it might be called, she would envision different things. So, for example, when she started gathering people to take them to where they would be free, she would often, you know, not at her own will, but just kind of fall asleep. And in the sleep, something might come to her for them not to go the way they were going, but to cross the river instead of, so that nobody would be able to follow their footsteps and footprints and things like that. So I wanted to share with people, not just someone that's written about historically because they had a certain number of people that they managed to take from enslavement, but she was a person who knew who she was. She believed in a higher power than herself, which most of us call God, but something greater than her. And she believed that that was leading her. And even in her illness, her handicap from being hit in the head, the kinds of things that would come to her in her slumber or her trance-like state, she would use those things and take people to freedom. And she's the only person who did that and never lost anybody. And it's not sure how many people she did that for, but um, for certain, it was, they say 1,000, and they say that maybe that's not the correct amount. But she also moved places, you know, like she was on the Eastern Shore, but because of the Eastern Shore was a different kind of place. It was actually very coastal, and so there was lots of water around, so things that might be harvested like rice or something like that. But some of the things that they may have done in deeper south, like picking cotton or corn or whatever they may have been picking, they didn't have that same ability over a full length of time to do that kind of thing. So a lot of people were used to build canals along the waterways that led to the Chesapeake Bay and into the Atlantic Ocean, where they could take they had lots of trees. If you've been to the Eastern Shore, there's lots of big trees there. So they had trees where they built canals, and they would take the trees, you know, out into the ocean to different places to sell to people, and these kinds of things. And Harriet Tubman actually worked on like canals and things like that. So she would be stuck in the swamps helping to build canals. When she was in the, she joined the Union Army, and she, because also coming from with her ancestors, the people that were with her, though, that had come from Africa and could share those things with her, she often knew how to, when they were going to freedom, she knew what weeds to pick up and give to the babies to put them to sleep so they wouldn't cry, and give away that they were there. She knew when she was in the midst of the Union Army and somebody was shot, what she could pick from the ground and help to ease their pain. If they were going to die, maybe she couldn't help them, or either get them to where they could get help. She had all of these different things that she learned from probably her grandparents and her parents and the other people that surrounded her in community. And she took these things and she was able to free people, not just from the Eastern Shore, but even deeper south, where she actually joined the army to go deeper south because some of her family was being taken away from where she was to do that. And along the way, you know, she had prayers, she had faith, and she was able to get people to continue with her, as frightening as it may have been to them at the time. There's a story about when she first went away. If you've seen the movie, you know this, that she was married to John Tubman, And then she decided after the third time she was really going to go to freedom this fourth time. And so she became free, and she went back to get him actually to go with her into a free place where they could have children, and the children would not be enslaved, because if children were with their mothers, they were enslaved like their mothers. But when she got back to John Tubman, he had married someone else. And so that didn't stop her, though. She got her brothers and her sisters and some of their friends and cousins or whomever, and she took to freedom. And they got to a place where one time she said, we're not going to go by land, we need to cross this water. So I don't know if you've ever been to places where there's a lot of coastal waters, you know, coming into either the bay or going into the ocean. You also know that there are alligators and snakes and all of these kinds of things around. And so her brother was like, oh, heck no, I'm not going across this river like that. And the other people were just standing there frozen. And so Harriet, who was maybe 4'6" or something, she was a small woman, went across this water first, and then told them to come along. And before that, though, her brother said, I'm going back home, I'm not going. She puts a gun to his head and says, you will be free or die. And so that's how deeply she felt about freedom. So those are the things that make her a public mystic and also a freedom fighter.
You know what's
But
interesting is that because I saw the movie, and for a lot of people, they didn't have a concept of what you're discussing now. So they didn't take the movie seriously. They didn't believe the movie. And everything that you're saying solidifies what was actually in the movie.
Yeah, yeah, and more. I mean, there's more than just, you know, that. She had a deep belief in God, and her belief in God was probably more like the Africans than the way you learn it here, you know, now, because in African cosmology, who they call the supreme being is an entity that they believe helped to create the universe, but we are all part of that entity. And so we have gifts given to us to help us in community on this earth with people, to help people to be able to till the soil or whatever. She took all of those things very seriously, and as you know, something that she was given not just for herself, but for the people around her. And then as she moved further north, because they were following them, trying to get them, and she ended up in New York, she ran into the women's suffrage people, which were mostly white women at the time. And but she joined them because she began to see how women still do suffer a lot of times more than males in certain situations. And so she became a sort of a woman suffragist, or there's a word in the religious category they call womanist. You know, so she was like a womanist, someone who cared about the plight of women. But the difference between a womanist and a feminist is that Black women don't just care about the women that they're around, but also the males as well, because those males are their husbands, their brothers, their cousins, their uncles. They are the people that they work with, you know, and all of that. And so Harriet is what I consider the first womanist person, and she was a freedom fighter. She was someone who was willing to take the risks that they were to get to freedom. So they get to New York, and then the slave catchers are coming up state New York trying to get these people and take them back. And so now she's taking them from New York all the way to Canada. There's another story I put in the book where she's in upstate New York getting ready to go across the Niagara Falls Bridge. And she has her whole group of people with her. And as they're walking across, there's this one gentleman named Joe. And she says, and Joe is scared to death the whole time. So she says to him, Joe, look at the falls, look at the falls. and he doesn't look, he doesn't say anything. He says, all I want to do is to get on the other side of the bridge and be free. And so they walk through across the bridge, and finally they get to the other side. And she says, Joe, you're free, you're free. And he said, oh, thank God, the next time I'm going to be free, I'm going to heaven. But he would, and she said to him, but you could have at least looked at the falls, because it was a beautiful scene, you know, as they were going toward their freedom. And then when she got to Canada, they started calling her Moses. And the people who were looking for her, maybe they started calling her Moses even before she got to Canada. But because they were calling her Moses, they were thinking that the person that was doing all of this was male. They didn't realize it was this little small woman that was doing all of those things. So
her
Harriet is
kept her alive.
Yes.
The fact that she was unsuspecting.
But also, you know, in on the Eastern Shore, during her 200th anniversary, I know one of the historians that kind of follows Harriet, and he did a video. They were in there's this place called Blackwater down on the Eastern Shore, where she probably used to go travel to kind of stay out of sight and everything. And one thing that they did is that they actually moved at night. They slept during the day, and so sometimes they would sleep in the hollow of trees. And so she would be in a tree, perhaps, you know, sleeping in the tree. And these people eventually, because she didn't lose anybody and she managed to do a lot, they allowed her, you know, to give them instructions on how to get to freedom. And so they did. So, you know, not only that makes her a public mystic, but not only is she a public mystic, she's also a womanist, as I mentioned before, but she's also someone who was totally and she totally knew who she was. I'm losing my words, but you know, I don't know if you've heard of Howard Thurman.
Yeah,
Howard Thurman wrote a book called Jesus and the Disinherited, and in that book about Jesus and the disinherited, the first chapter is about Jesus's way of being, you know, and how, in spite, although people have made him king and all of these different things, he was one of the marginalized people. He lived in a place called Nazareth, and they said, well, what good comes out of Nazareth? And his friends were people on the margins, just like him. But he refused to allow being on the margins stop him from noticing and being all of the giftedness that he had and could be. And he started trying to teach the people that were following him, just like Harriet was doing, you know, to try to help them to feel more free. I think about us now. I think about, you know, the Palestinians. I was in Palestine, Israel, Palestine in 2019. I was with the Palestinian in the places that they had been displaced and put, and you know, where they made their own makeshift schools. And we went into a school with the young people and danced with them, you know. And so I have a great compassion for the people of Palestine and the things that they are going through. And they are among the marginalized. And I went to Nazareth and I saw the kind of marginalized people that were in Nazareth and different things like that. And the thing is that I'm beginning to see not just Black people as being, you know, people who are oppressed or, you know, people trying to dominate them and keep them in a certain category. But all across the world, there's some small group of people who are trying to control everybody else so they can have the power that they have in the world. And the only way, as Thurman would say, the only way that we can do anything about that is to find the genuine in ourselves. And when we find the genuine in ourselves, when we know who we are and what we are capable of and what our gifts are, then we can use those things for our own self and be free within and also help other people. So that book that I wrote about Harriet has at the end of each chapter something called Harriet's Apothecary. And it's at the end of each chapter is something, I put a quote about Harriet and then something that someone else wrote, Howard Thurman or Maya Angelou or something like that. And also something for them to do, something for them to try, like walking around in their neighborhood and seeing the networks that are in their neighborhood, but something to do that helps you to deepen your own understanding of yourself and what your gifts are, so that we too can find that internalized freedom to do the things that Harriet was able to do.
Do you have a copy of your book?
Yes, I do.
That you can show us? Okay, so we can see the cover, and then so when people go look for the book, they'll know
Walking the
what it
Way of
looks like.
Harriet Tubman. Yeah.
Now, who did your cover art?
I wonder if it's in here. So there is a person with this place called Abbey of the Arts that does this kind of artwork. I don't remember their name at the moment, but this looks like the kind of artwork they usually do. So
Okay.
this, I believe, is what it came from. I like the cover myself.
It's very cool.
Well, while we have a few minutes, I know you have a retreat that you do that's based on the book.
I do a lot of things. a retreat. I have a retreat that I do, yes. And also sometimes I use parts of Harriet to talk to people about finding the genuine in themselves. It may sound kind of cliche and something that people say all along, but I am a spiritual director, an emotional emancipation circle facilitator, and also a certified pastoral caregiver. So I talk to people and see people and also work on myself. And I know that if we aren't really grounded in who we truly are, and most of us aren't, because people are trying to make us be something else, but if we don't find that genuine in ourselves and be who we truly are, we will always be oppressed. And the thing that Harriet showed was that she got people away physically, but if you can get away physically, but you have that mental oppression, then you're not really free at all.
Yeah,
Right.
that's definitely true. And a lot of times we will follow trends. And if you constantly are following trends, you really can never find your true self, because you really are being led by I guess the powers that
Control.
be. You're being led by whatever is popular at the time. It's difficult to find yourself if you're constantly doing that.
Yes, absolutely.
And
And if
Harriet
you
was
just think about
definitely
this,
not doing what was popular.
I mean, if you just think about our struggle, as much as we might know of it personally, as African Americans, we are constantly being directed to be like the white folks tell us to do, in order to be acceptable. The gifts that we have naturally are not worthy. But then if you do continue to read history, you'll find out, at least in the US, but also if you read history and go way back in Africa, almost everything that we have now came from Africa. And most of the things that in the US came from the hard work and the ingenuity and the artistry of Black people. So, it's in us, but they would like to subdue it or say that it doesn't belong to us so that they can keep their dominance.
Yeah. Or we haven't historically gotten the financial benefit of what our gifts are. Other people have benefited financially, and we need to. That's starting to change in small ways. I'm seeing some small changes with the younger generations doing things a little bit differently. Not all of them are doing the way I would do it, but they're charting their own course.
And that's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
They come next, yes.
Yeah.
But we should be,
that's
those of us, I don't know how old you are, but I'm 70 years old now. So those of us that are still living are supposed to pour into those young people too.
always.
They may use it differently than we did, you know, but we're supposed to give them what we have.
Yeah, the wisdom. That's,
Mhm.
that's what we need to do. Well, Teresa, show us your book cover one more time. We're at the end of our show, and
Okay.
or tonight. And so your book is called Walking the Way of Harriet Tubman, and it talks about her being a public mystic. And we knew she was a freedom fighter, but Therese covers a lot more of the spiritual side of Harriet. And
And also, I don't just cover Harriet actually, because if you ask somebody about who are the mystics, they will tell. As a matter of fact, when I wrote this book, I actually looked up who through the ages have been mystics, and most of them are white people, and actually, except that the desert Ammas and Abbas, or mothers and fathers who were, you know, gone out into the desert, and they're considered the first spiritual directors, at least in the Christian tradition. And also they're considered the first psychologists, because they went out into the desert and actually took themselves through a lot of changes in order to see what their humanity gave them or brought to them, you know. So much of what they were people of color, but you weren't told that. If you go to a spiritual guidance program, they'll bring to you all the Middle Ages spiritual guides and mystics, as they're called, as being, you know, who they are, and all of them being coming from European people. But the truth of the matter is, we all have that ability that mystic ability in us. Whether we use it or not is something different. And so in this book, I named some people like Malcolm X, and I named Martin Luther King Jr., and I can't think of everybody, but you know, women and men of color who are public mystics and have given themselves. James Baldwin, you know, I'm thinking of nothing but men at the moment, but you know, have given themselves, you know, to advance us and to bring them along and actually advance the country that we live in, this nation that we live in, called the United States of America.
Well, Therese, we are actually a little bit past our time, and we like to at 9. So thank you so much for being a guest on Black Authors Matter TV, and congratulations on your book.
Okay, and thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.